That should work.
Hurrah! We almost look like twins, I have to say.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah,
bearded.
That's it.
It's almost like virtually looking at a picture of myself.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know which one. I can close one side out and just speak to myself. It'll be the same.
So I did send some questions through, but I don't know if you've had a chance.
I've had a quick look at them. Yeah, that's it. I'm just.
I just thought there'd be a good little starting point for us to sort of jump off from, really. So Owen, tell me about the first live improv show you watched. Where did that take place, and sort of roughly what year and stuff was that?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this earlier on, and I think the first, outside of the obvious watching Whose Lines Are Anyway on TV, I think the first live improvisation show I saw was probably actually in Edinburgh in about 2006-ish. I had already learned to do improvisation by that point, but I'd never actually seen a show because there was no one doing shows locally at the time. And we went into Edinburgh, and Paul Foxcroft, who I learned off initially, was hosting a charity night on the night we arrived in Edinburgh. And the people I can remember who were on the lineup were Mike McShane, Sarah Pascoe, Deborah Francis White, and a few other people. And they just did a sort of straight theatre sports as a sort of fundraising thing. And I remember being called up on stage and for the sort of typical, whatever you call columns or the audience touch game or whatever, however you refer to that game. And the first three words that I said were angels and anchovies, or the first two words I said were angels and anchovies, and was made fun of for years by the other people in my improv group. Owen, why don't we just put on angels and anchovies this show instead? And they were like, did you just have a dictionary in your head and you were stuck at AN and just carried on? I think that was. Yeah, I think I then saw a whole load more improvisation while I was up in Edinburgh for the 2 weeks I was up there doing a non-improvised show. So I think that was 2006 or 2007, a couple of years into university when I was. I think that was. I can't think of another one I'd seen before that, so I think that was probably it.
So, were you training whilst you were in Liverpool then?
Yeah, so I went to Liverpool University in 2004. And when I started, Paul Foxcroft was at LIPA doing his tech qualification, and he just taught 3 classes to the university's drama society on a Saturday morning. And so that was it. And it was just a case of he was wanting someone to do improvisation, and so went to the drama society, and myself and there was probably 3 others who were sort of hardcore attendees, just turned up most weeks, and myself and Mark Rawle, who was also in medical school with me, a couple of years later ended up forming an improv group because we didn't have, and so we ended up performing at Sticky Floor in Liverpool for probably about 6 or 7 years, but having just formed at university without a huge amount of watching improvisation and more just some basic introduction from Paul, and then a huge amount of reading. And then Mark eventually went to some classes with the guys at Comedy Sports in Manchester, so I used to bring back bits of that. And then gradually I started going to classes as and when they popped up in Liverpool. So I'd go to some of the impropriety stuff. Went to a class you taught at LIPA once. I can't remember. You taught an afternoon class in LIPA when I was working with Ed Croft at one point from Jolly Bait. And I just remember. Yeah, I can't remember much about that, but except for there's one that is really focuses in my head of, there was 2 people who were working in a butcher's, and the guy in the back was like, oh, I can't find the expiry dates. And the other guy was like, well, we need to find them because the inspector's coming. And you went, there's your game. And they were like, what's the game? Because they'd never done game-based improvisation before. And so they were like, oh, so you want us to start a game now? What game do you want us to play? And they were looking for a short form game. And you're like, no. The fact you can't find the expiry dates, that's your game for the scene. And that stuck with me as a I still use that sort of scene as an example of finding a game of a scene.
Yeah.
Later.
No, I do remember that in Lipa, because they had very nice facilities and compared to where I currently work. So one of the things I found that the learning that I've undertaken in improvisation sort of feeds into my life. I just wondered if there is anything that you, or it may not be, but something similar where you kind of go, okay, this is sort of in a philosophy almost. But I'll give you an example. My mum saw me in loads of theatre stuff. I was an actor for a very long time. And she came to see me in a show called Hoof. And she was like, oh, this is the first time that you look completely relaxed on stage. And she said, well, why is that? And I said, well, because nothing can go wrong. And so sort of creatively, that's why I sort of fell in love with improv, because there's nothing, it's just a happy accident, or it's a new direction that you hadn't quite discovered yet. And so, kind of that idea of yes and, I know there's that Jim Carrey movie where he says yes to everything, but actually generally I do try to do that in as much as I can. It's kind of, because opportunity comes along. If you say no, the opportunity's closed down. If you say yes, you go on a bit of a journey, and you can always jump off that journey. But I wonder if there's anything that's sort of similar.
It's probably I've got two separate answers to that question. So first of all, the idea of feeling at home doing improvisation. To this day, people, I get that comment of like, oh, you look more at home on stage than you do off it when you're doing improvisation. I'm like, yeah, because it's a world where not censoring my thoughts and allowing myself complete sort of communal work, and that sharing of creativity with people is encouraged. And I think it's so discouraged elsewhere that idea of, like just share with us what's on your brain is encouraged. And so I was diagnosed with ADHD just a couple of years ago, after years of struggling to do academic work, but just about edging through most things. And my wife was like, oh, like, just go get yourself checked out. Like, for years, people have told you probably got this, and let's go check it out. So I got diagnosed by an educational psychologist. And it's that sort of function of allowing myself to enjoy the freedom to be, and my attention's on the moment, and that's all that anyone is here. I don't have to think about the planning from hours ago or something in the future or how this is documented down or whatever else. I can just be in this moment. And so for me, so much of my life is good. And now there's probably, to go off that to how it's affected the rest of my life. As I mentioned earlier on, I went to medical school, I'm a doctor. And so I'm an intensive care consultant is what I do for work. And I'd say the most important aspect of being a doctor to me, and hopefully for most people, is communicating. I think communication is the most essential aspect of being a doctor, beyond, I actually think, science things, because if people don't understand what's happening to them and don't engage with it, it doesn't make a difference how much and how accurate your diagnosis is. You've got to have the people engaged and bought in and understanding and being able to participate in a treatment. So that sort of ability to communicate with people and find a level in which communication works between you, and what level you communicate on, that is so much of partnered improvisation of, okay, you're someone I've just met, but how do we connect here? I think is essential to a lot of what I do communicating wise. And also the ability to be in a moment and engage in just the moment helps me quite a lot in emergency situations, because I'm very good at ignoring, okay, this is what's happened before, this is what's happened elsewhere. I'm very good at being able to break down in a logical way. Okay, this is the situation we're in now. A, B, C. Everyone in the room, okay, these are the skills you've got. Let's use this together and put that together. And improvisation, I think, is quite essential like has been an essential component in my training to be able to manage emergency situations, which it turns out is something I'm good at, which you never know until you're in the situation. But that, and I like, how much of that is I was good anyway, or how much is, oh, from doing improvisation, that you don't know, but it's it definitely helps.
Yeah, I mean, from hearing you speak, it reminds me of a really good improv teacher that I worked with called Todd Stashwick, who he used the phrase. He said, "Listen with your eyes and ears," which is a really good skill, because kind of judging the temperature of somebody and how they are with you physically, and also what their voice is doing, it's actually made me far more emotionally cognitive. I think I'm probably am on a neurodivergent spectrum in some way, shape, or form, because I don't interpret emotion that well, but I've actually got much better at it. And I think partly because I'm now really careful and watch really carefully for signals. And I think that was something that I definitely developed as a result of doing lots and lots of improv kind of activity and stuff. So that's really fascinating. So thank you for sharing with that. So a moment of magic. I mean, I've got numerous that I can kind of think about, but there's some moments where you just kind of go, wow, I'll never see that again, but that will stay with me forever.
Yeah. Again, yeah, you think about these things, and it's interesting how sort of personal some of these moments can be, and then like, but also how moments in shows can are memorable as well. So there's probably a big part of my like improv history was doing the improvathons in Liverpool. So the first one I did was Dearly Beloved, which was the like, I can't remember exactly which year that was, but it was the same year as the Royal Marriage, because that's why they chose to do a marriage one. And it came about almost by chance, in that I knew the people from Impropriety kind of a bit by that point, because we were both doing improvisation in the city. But we had never crossed over too much. And then 2 days before that improvathon, I had been at their show in Mellow Mellow when Mellow Mellow was a thing. And I spoke to Rosie, who was one of the directors of Impropriety at the time, and said, oh, I'd love to be involved in that. And she was like, well, why don't you come along at 9 o'clock on Saturday, and give you a guest slot. And I said, oh, can Mark from my group come along as well? Because he's also done a lot of stuff like this. And we're interested in doing more of this theatrical style improvisation, not just the short form stuff that we've been doing a lot of elsewhere. And we went along that evening, and we ended up starting at 9 o'clock, and we were going to just do a slot, and in the end, Larry was like, just stay for as long as you want. So, and I've not missed an episode of a Liverpool improvathon since then. So since starting that one, I've been in every episode since. And so, like, as far as the communal nature of the moments of doing a show like that, that was that first time when, like, there's 20 people and you're doing a show together for 30 hours, and that the way that comes together, and there's people who are friends for life who I only met that day, and that, like, so there's a moment of magic from that point of view, the very first one I did. And then there's probably two moments of like things that have happened in shows from improvathons that are probably the ones that are memorable for me. One was in the we did one called Umbridge, a show called Umbridge, which was sort of a little country town, kind of like the Archers. And there were two characters played by Chris Mead and Mark Rawle, who were two priests who were the town vicars, and they just played games together. And pretty much for their game as improv was playing board games and such like that. And so their Hot 30 every hour was like every hours was they were playing a different game together, from chess to hide and seek to something else. And their relationship was so charming and friendly, and nothing much else. They did a lot of giving advice to other characters, but much of their sort of story for the full 30 hours was just them being friends. And then they they ended up getting married in the second to last episode, I think it was. These two characters who are certain things, and like there's obviously such context and overview, but like in an improv world, that's absolutely fine. And so Rosie, who would be directing it, who was obviously a director, but married them. She was like, who marries the priests? Well, obviously God. So Rosie, as the director, was the voice of God, and so performed the wedding ceremony for two priests. And again, that moment of the director becoming a part of the performance and something happening within a world that both has some kind of political commentary, but is also just, this is charming, and nobody in this world is going, well, that's not going to happen. That's not what happens here. It's just very much a yes and situation. And it was just a completely perfect moment.
That sounds gorgeous.
And I can remember, like, that's it. Like, people, there's something about the lapping nature of like improv, that idea of like almost role playing for 30 hours that makes you care about those characters. And and I think you do genuinely care when they live, when they die, when they get married, and some more than others. And that was like one of the moments that's always stuck with me as a real true moment for it. And the other one was, we did a magical forest one. I can't remember what, happily ever after, I think it was called, ? And Jonathan Monkhouse, who's an improviser from London, had been playing a character that seemed quite nice all the way through, and then about one episode from the end, again, he managed to summarize up almost everything had happened, and actually sort of subverted the way that everyone, like the sort of below story, as if he had been some kind of chaos demon controlling the whole thing. And he managed to pull together huge amounts of stuff that had happened over 30 hours and create a cognizant narrative, how actually I was responsible for all this stuff. And like literally, I can remember Jaws being picked up off the floor for like half an hour.
He was Machiavellian, and all his machinations going on, kind of go
and so that's it. Those two moments are like ones that like really stick out to me. As far as seeing stuff that I wasn't involved in at all, there's been a few moments. So I've got to admit, so I took a couple of friends of mine to see Hoof when you were performing at the Everyman, and there's there were two reasons why that was kind of a magical moment to me. One was seeing improv on a main stage in a presenting house theatre and a production company theatre is what my dream for life and everything else. And so I'm sure that's so it says. And so that was a huge thing for me, because I was still at university at the time, so was still relatively new to it. But I was like, wow, like improvisation being given this respect, and so that was one great moment for me. But I took two friends, and I remember my friend going, they were like, and that true moment of being, wow, that's just as good as any theatre show I've seen in this theatre that was scripted. And I'm like, well, I'm like, we're not looking for it to be as good or better. We're looking at it to be its own thing. And the fact that you enjoyed it so much. And she came back to see, we saw two shows in 3 days. My friend came back with me 2 days later. And that ability to show someone, like, look, and she didn't enjoy the second one quite as much, I'll be honest, but she still enjoyed it. But like, and I was like, look, that's the nature of it. But it like, and she was like, I like this bit, that bit, and that bit. But the first one was kind of perfect. And I was like, but that's it. That's the moment. And I couldn't tell you anything that was in those shows.
Was Keddy a nun at any point?
Yeah, Keddy. Well, yeah, probably is the answer to that. I think Keddy might have been. I think Keddy might have been a singing flower at one point. There's a part of me that a memory of a sort of singing flower, and dancing, a dancing flower shop. I'm not sure if that's true or it's a made up memory. But yeah, so I think, and that again, that magic of bringing someone who had only ever seen us do short form improv and be like, wow, like this is amazing. And yeah, like those moments have always been important to me.
Brilliant. Tell me about the Living Dying Dead. That's when you contacted me, I was kind of immediately went, oh, this sounds, I'm so excited to A, see it, B, have the opportunity to share it with the wider community and the region of Merseyside. But I'm of all the things, I'm kind of going, oh, this just makes so much sense.
Yeah, so I can tell you, so it came about, so during lockdown, as so many things, like this story started at this moment, show story started at this moment in time. I was doing a course on the Improv place, which was a online improv sharing space that was created by Chris Mead and Katie Shute during lockdown, which sadly is no more, but was a very useful thing at the time. And I think I was doing a masterclass on teaching on there, and we were chatting about things that we were interested in improvisation, what we'd like to see a show about. And I just noticed that I think it was Rhiannon Jenkins, who's the other person I worked with, had written down in the thing, it was like, oh, I'd like to do some improvisation about death and dying. And I was like, oh, like that triggered something off. And so I sent her a message a couple of days later and said, I noticed you said that. Do you want to talk about it? So we met online and we chatted about it and to find out things. So I've always been interested in the subject of death and dying from a sort of work point of view to a certain extent, but also I feel as society as a whole, it's a very taboo subject, and like that's my main concern about it. And so many people get to the point where they're at the end of their lives, and it's the first time they've ever thought about dying, or a loved one is dying, and they think. And the more that I think you think about something, it's easier to deal with. And there's a great writer on death and dying called Catherine Mannix, who's a retired palliative care consultant, and she talks about that we're getting to the first generations who are getting old now where death wasn't normal for them when they were young, because up until a couple of generations ago, people had young family members die in the war. There was no socialized health service. There was still a lot of deprivation and such like that. And until COVID happened, we'd got to a point where death was very much a failure of health services, not a normal part of life. And people don't talk about it. So me and Rhiannon during lockdown had a chat about this, and we said, let's create a show that helps people talk about it. And we applied to some festivals and got accepted to do it in Dublin in December 2020, so like 18 months ago now. And so we messaged people we thought would be interested. And again, because of like the pandemic, we had suddenly got a group of people from across Europe that we had spoke to. And so we managed to get a group together from quite a wide area. And we picked people intentionally with different life experiences, hopefully. And we met up in true improviser fashion without any rehearsal space. So we rehearsed it in Rhiannon's front room in a 48-hour period where we all slept on a couch in between doing the show, between rehearsing, because we couldn't afford rehearsal space or time or anything else and get funding. So, and yeah, we spent 48 hours trying to work out how to create a show about death and dying. And then we performed it now at Improv Fest Ireland twice and twice in Sweden. And I think it does the job. And so the selling pitch for the show is we take an honest approach to death as cast members, to using questions that the audience has provided us beforehand. So we get the audience to write down things that they might think of. If they found out they were dying, what questions would they have? And we read them backstage. So we don't take requests or suggestions the same way as normal groupers, but we all read all of the suggestions backstage to sort of input them inside us to try and make that personal show, but so we're not interrupting the theatricality by asking for suggestions on stage. And we try and respond to everything in a very honest manner, and trying to try and I think that's where improvisation can be helpful, is because we can share those honest responses. But it's also just you create good characters in situations, they still are funny. And that's it. We're still finding humor. We're finding drama, and we're finding natural relationships, natural characters. And so all the shows we've managed to do so far, they come out naturally. We don't have to try looking for laughs. We're looking for moments and characters influenced by the questions that people had. And so, for example, in one show, the question an audience member wrote was, who's going to look after my cats? And so we had a whole scene of her trying to get her neighbors to look after her cats after she died. But how, and the neighbors all complaining about the fact she's always asking her to look after the cats until they found out why she was doing it, and then felt suddenly terribly awkward because they were being like, oh, you're always asking us to look after your cats, like you can't keep paying us in chocolate for this, and then like, why are you dying or something? And then she was like, yeah, I'm dying, and it's like, that moment of humor. But it's a real situation. People do worry about those things. I don't think that's a flippant thing for people to worry about. Um, and yeah, so I think I think so far we've created a show that's fun to watch. It's interesting, it's dramatic, but I think it also hopefully makes people leave thinking, oh, is there anything I need to think about with regards to this that I haven't thought about yet in case something bad happens? And I think I've mentioned to you online before, and my dad sadly died in January. And it's interesting. So I got a phone call from my mum telling me my dad had died while I was at work, actually. I was on call at work. And I had a couple of hours where I was going home from work and I was going to be on my own. And actually, what I did was message the group of Living, Dying, Dead and was like, okay, here's some ideas for the show I've got from my personal experience. And like, it's interesting how allowing me to think both things that I'd thought of beforehand and things I found out that I hadn't thought about beforehand have been there in my head. And I think so some things I think it was quite helpful in that, like, how do you speak to people who are in the situation, and what communication is there, and what is important for people to know, and what might they be worried about. I learned some stuff myself from doing the show, and then I found out, I was like, I suddenly sent a message and I was like, phone calls are much more important than we've had so far in the show. There's a lot of phone calls in dealing with death and dying because people aren't always there anymore. So I said, we need to work out how we put phone calls in the show. They were like, and they were like, okay, take a moment. Don't try, like, we'll not take you a full direction today. If you want to sort of talk about things, feel free. But and yeah, so I think, and having trained as a doctor in Liverpool, something lovely as a thing of the first time we're going to be doing it in England is back where I trained, and I performed in Unity Theatre twice with Impropriety. So it's kind of like, three times, I think. And so it's quite nice to go back to a theatre I'm familiar with and perform a show that means so much to me. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, no, you know, all of those things that you express, I'm kind of super excited to, you know, the idea that humor emerges from the situation. It doesn't have to be forced. It kind of naturally comes out, and there's a degree of tension there, and tension is then released through laughter. You know, even the smallest, daftest thing can kind of be hilarious because of the situation that you find yourself in.
So the show we did in Dublin, there was there was a scene which was like the person leaving their work, having their last day at work after they would find out they were dying, and one of the characters was like, and sort of saying, like, one of the workmates was like, when are you going? And it was, and the audience fell about laughing. I was like, and like, well, it's not really a choice. Like, it's not like I've not got a last day on earth. Like, I don't have a day when I'm going to punch out. It's not the way it works.
Certainly, an expiry date.
That's it. Yeah. So when are you going? It was just, and it was an accidental turn of phrase, but that became a thing that was commented on several times. And again, that's it. You break up you build up that tension with a serious situation, and then someone just saying something which is probably not the way that you would expect someone to say something in that situation becomes funny and human.
Yeah, because my experience of death, and you know, I have to say it's been relatively limited, but those moments where you kind of go, okay, so it becomes, so the person's passed and it becomes reflective, and do you remember when? And those beautiful memories that people hold. And so someone's passed, but they stay with you forever because those memories are part of you. And that shared knowledge, or explain to somebody who maybe hadn't experienced that, but because it's so authentic and it comes from you, that makes it special for somebody else, and that sort of memory, that ripple effect is kept. And so someone never really goes, the legacy is there in many ways. And so yeah, I'm extremely excited to see because when you messaged me and went, oh, okay, so the audience get to choose the funeral song, and that was bizarrely that was a conversation I'd had with my children about my funeral song and what it would be and blah 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 blah, and thinking about, I've got a large comic book collection that gets regularly shoved from one room to the next because my wife can't stand them. So I have to thought, and it was like, she says, when you go, who's going to have these? And I was like, well, actually, that's a really good question. Who's going to have this? There's thousands of pounds in printed material that my kids are not into it at all. So it's like, where would this go?
Yeah, that's it. So the thing is, like, it's fascinating. So my my dad asked for a song by Paul Robeson to be played at his funeral, and the reason, and I know the reason behind that, because Paul Robeson, during the miners' strike in Wales in the 1940s, 50s, or maybe earlier, I can't remember exactly when it was, but he went and sang in Wales in solidarity at the local mining institute, and so this big bass baritone sort of American singer who'd been came and sort of was to show solidarity. And so my dad and my dad had always had an idea to write a play, which was two Welsh miners stood outside the called Waiting for Paul, which was going to be a sort of a parallel story to Waiting for Godot, but two Welsh miners waiting for Paul Robeson to turn up to sing at their mining institute, but they don't know who he is, but they know it's important that he's coming. And he had this idea of these two Welsh miners and trying to mirror exactly the sort of story of it. And so yeah, and he sadly never managed to do that. But like, I know that like that's why that guy was important to him. And I was able to share the story with people at the funeral that's why my dad thought this guy was it. And yeah, and we don't know. He chose a specific song, and we don't know why, because he never really explained it. But that was one thing at the whole of his funeral and the whole of his death, really. He said, "This is what I need," was him saying about that song being played. And so we were like, okay. And I think that's the reason why. But part of it is me adding stories to a thing that happened.
Yeah. So, because I know we haven't got much time left. So next year, LIF 2024, you have money's not an issue. Who do you think is really exciting, doing something different that you would want to see at the festival?
Okay, yeah. So I think the group that I'd really like to see, and I've seen bits and pieces of them before, but I've seen them before, is Parallelogram a Phonograph, which is a narrative group from Austin in Texas, who do exactly that sort of improvised theater thing that I'm interested in. That's not based specifically on different genres, but more on the idea of doing that, that. Also, if the money's no option, I'd love to see some of the people who got their breaks in American comedy years and years ago doing improv coming back and doing improv. You get Tina Fey and Amy Poehler together,
or Joan Rivers.
Yeah,
Joan
exactly.
Rivers,
yeah, like that whole group. We'll get Bill Murray, Joan Rivers, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, and like groups probably haven't done improvisation for some time, and put them all together on stage.
Because Ken Campbell was in the same in the Second City team with Joan Rivers, and I just always imagined that would be the best thing ever.
Thank you to Owen from Playing Dead Theatre. As you can see, we ran out of time, but there will be a part 2. Owen and team will be performing Living Dying Dead in Unity 2 on Friday the 21st of April at 4 p.m. Tickets are £5 and £7 and are still available at the Unity website, which is www.unitytheatreliverpool.co.uk. Go to the What's On page and search for Liverpool Improvisation Festival. All the details for Living Dying Dead are there, as are the other shows which are part of the festival. Thank you.